Okay guys, today we're going to talk about zones a little bit differently than I've done in the past, because in the past I've always talked about zones in terms of how you expose, place a zone here or there, but the sideline of that has been using zones to discover shadows and by extension light. Do we want to be in low zones like 1, 2, almost black? Do we want middle gray, which is zone 5? Do we want to be up near pure white in zone 8 and 9? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a series of videos talking about the power of each zone, because even though zones are a tool, using Ansel Adams' zone system is a tool for exposure. If you actually start visualizing with zones and thinking of your scene construction with those zones, it's going to transform how you expose and how you use shadow, most importantly, because when you hunt shadow, you find light. It would be pretty easy, and we'll get there, talking about zone 4, 5, 6, because those are those middle ranges. But when you push the range, oftentimes we think, oh, black is not something we want to use. But today I'm going to talk about zone 0 and why black is actually important. A portrait, normally we look at skin and you're like, okay, we want zone 5, we want zone 6, we want zone 7, something like that on our model as they're doing their poses. But that's not a rule, and it doesn't exclude using any of the other zones as you do that. So when you think about your model and then you think about their surrounding tones, when I'm thinking about how to light a person, I'm usually thinking, okay, what's their skin tone need to look like? But this can be a mistake. If you look, one of the secrets that you will see when you look at photographers like Ansel Adams, who with Fred Archer developed the zone system, is that they used every zone. People think, oh, the zone system is just a method of exposure. It was a method used in the darkroom. And there's truth that it was used for that. But what the zones actually do for you is they help you think in terms of tone. That 10-stop range allows you to do everything. Stop worrying too much about, high dynamic range or this, or my camera does more than 10 stops. That's not relevant to the zone system. The zone system is not just telling you how much range you can pull out of a camera sensor or a piece of film. It has nothing to do with that. The zone system is all about, this is black and this is white. How are we going to use and process and finish the image? Let's look at some examples. Let's actually analyze zone 0 and zone 1. In this particular video, I'm going to lump these together because they're both your extreme shadows. But I don't want anyone to think, because I'm including zone 1 in this, that you should always be afraid to go to zone 0. By the way, you can download the mobile zone guide that is perfect for your mobile phone screen. You can just have it as a reference out in the field, because if you start referencing those zones, you're going to start to visualize shadows and light and contrast better. If you look here at how zones relate to a histogram, you'll see that middle gray, of course, is right in the middle. You go all the way down to 0 and all the way up to 10. If you count the spaces, this represents a total of a 10-stop range, which represents everything from black to white. Zones can be this very nerdy thing because us film shooters use them, the 4x5 shooters, the darkroom nerds, things like that. And they're amazing for that because they actually start relating to how chemicals develop and things. But you don't have to overthink zones when you're shooting. Zones allow you to visualize and see the tonal values. And what I'm actually going to do is we're going to look at these in different ways on different images. But I'm just kind of giving you this primer as we start with zone 1 and zone 0. Other videos I talk about how to actually expose for zones. But I want to make the point here that I'm more focusing here on editing and visualizing the zones that you want and where to put things. Using a spot meter, exposing for zones, putting things exactly in the zone you want. These are very powerful techniques. They're something I talk about a lot in the Expose workshop and in other videos on this channel. But let's talk about using each grouping of zones in each range of light so that you understand your shadow better. Because if you master shadow, you master light. But you can see that here's zone 1, zone 2, and these are actual photos of a cardstock. Zone 1, of course, you see really black. Each zone is a full stop. So, of course, you're doubling the light as you go up, having the light as you go down. The beauty of zones and why they work so fluidly is that zones work the same as stops in your camera. 1 stop, 1 zone, right? Overexpose, 1 stop, or push 1 stop exposure, increase a zone. Turn the slider in Lightroom up one stop, increase a zone. Turn it down a stop, decrease a zone. So zones, even though they go all the way back to the 50s with Ansel Adams and Fred Archer, they really fluidly integrate with everything about how we expose today. Let's start by just taking one of these portraits we did. Now, we can look up in our histogram and know that this is middle gray, down here is zone 0, zone 1, zone 3, etc., right? We have a rough guide when we look at a histogram here or on the camera. But when I'm really trying to understand more and edit more specifically, I will turn to zone-specific tools. So I'm gonna run the Lumist map, okay? Now, everything I'm telling you about zones today, you absolutely don't need Lumist to do it. But what Lumist does that's really cool is it builds a real-time zone map. So you can see here, we're looking at everything in real time on these zones, and they correlate all the way down to zone 0 and all the way up to zone 10. And you can edit, you can build things out, and then in Lumist we can select individual zones. So I could say, hey, take the zones 3, and I want to edit those zones specifically. So it's a really great zone tool for advanced editing. It's kind of like luminosity masking, but more nuanced. It's easier to use, it's faster. Should I say this video is sponsored by Lumist Actions? Because obviously if you guys support my products, it helps support the channel. But what I want to emphasize is to help you see these zones. The reason I like this color-coded zone is I can look, and we can look at this and say, hey, the face is all the way up to zone 7, and the shadows actually are all the way out down to zone 0. Now, let's turn off the zone map. So let's hide the map overlay, and you can see where each one of these is representative. So let's show the map overlay. If I were to put, for example, a curve layer on and start moving it, you would see those zones change in real time, and now I'm pushing her face all the way up to the edge of zone 9. Let's push it just shy of zone 9 and hide the zone map again and see what happens. You can see now the image overall is a lot brighter. Bear in mind, there's been no processing. I didn't even do a preset on this to show you this initial one. Now, let's go back to Lightroom and let me edit this more like I might actually edit. I'm gonna do a black and white just for the purposes of showing you. So I'm gonna run something like Classico 200, and I'm gonna open this again. Black and white is not essential to zones. A zone is a zone. So when I see a zone, when you expose for a zone, when you see a zone map like I'm showing you here, it's not seeing the color. The color doesn't matter, the luminance value is what matters. Her face now from this process, this preset that I ran in Lightroom, is pushing into zone 7. So we've got a wide range, right? Shadows are pushing all the way down to zone 0. Remember that zone 0 doesn't mean clip. On my particular zone scale, on the last 20% of 0 and 10, you can see that it goes black and it goes white instead of the color coding. So if I put a curve layer on here and pull my blacks, eventually you would see me clipping to true clipped black. Now you can be on the edge of this, right? So I could say, hey, I want to pull my blacks down a little bit with a curve, but if you push truly into clip black, most of the time, you're probably going a little far, right? This is such a contrast range that while in some images it could be useful, here it's a bit much. However, the difference, look at the staggering difference. We're actually pushing down, let me push it a little more, into fully clipped black now. As we drag this down, you can see it go black, black, instead of just red, black. Okay, let's turn that curve we made off. You can see we're still pushing into zone 0. And a lot in zone 1, that kind of golden color represented in this particular scale. But you can see here, when we have a little bit of zone 0 and we hide the map, there's still detail. So we're using that shadow. In fact, over here on the right, where we're pushing up, we need to tone that down because we're pushing up to the same level as her face. Remember, there's only one subject in an image. We want to separate our subject from our background. So I might, if I was editing this image, actually go in and fill this in so that I don't have light over here competing with her face. By using shadows, we're actually separating our subject from our background. And that's one of the most powerful things about shadows. The focal points in our image, the leading lines in our image are contrasting shadows and lights. And that's why 0 and 1 are actually so important. Let's look at this image here. So here's our raw file. Here is my edit process. I believe this was with Filmist presets.
And then let's just drop this right into Photoshop and analyze the zone. Sometimes it's actually surprising what the zones actually are, and I promise it will surprise you. This map is also in my Blackroom collection as well. In Lumist, you can select and edit the zones, but the same live map is available in Blackroom when you run the Blackroom black and white conversion that allows you to see this. Now, again, if you look down here, why does this image have impact? Look what's happening. We have zone 1 down here, all the way up to zone 7. So we're using our tonal range. People say, oh, zone 0 is super black. You don't want to be in zone 0. Well, maybe I don't want to be in true clipping most of the time. I usually want to be right on the edge of clipped 0 when I'm really trying to have great shadow. Stop being afraid of zone 0. Zone 0 actually still has a lot of detail, and this is what people don't realize. A lot of photographers don't even understand how they use the zones, and they're so simple and powerful. But then when they start using the zones, they think, oh, I need to stay above zone 2, zone 3, and below zone 7, zone 8. If I went to Lumist here and I said, give me zone 0 and zone 1. So I'm going to select these zones, and I'm going to do it the easy way with Lumist. And then I'm just going to take that zone and just do a 25 pixel feather so our lines aren't too hard. All right. So now I've selected my zone 1 and zone 0, and I'm just going to put a lighten curve on it. I could do this manually, but let's just pop it in there. All right, let's turn the zone map on again. So I'm going to show the map, and you can see here we've lifted this with this curve a little bit. But remember, this curve is only affecting zone 1 and 0, okay? So if I just push it up, I'm going to push out my zone 1 and 0, and I'm going to lift it. So there's almost no zone 0. I'm going to lift this up, so I've really only pushed it about a stop. Let's look what happens. Let's hide the zone map. It looks terrible because there's no shadow. So you would think, oh, zone 2 is still really shadowy. Well, remember, the amount of shadow and hence the amount of light that you have, zone 5 middle gray can look really white if it's next to pure black. And this is why you're going to be surprised if you start actually taking a zone guide, whether it's my little mobile zone guide, whether you're using Lumist or Blackroom, and start analyzing those zones. I'm also going to be including a desktop zone guide that you can actually drag into Photoshop and drag over an image if you don't have any of my live zone maps. When we lift those zones by a stop to a stop and a half, we lose the richness. Our shadow is gone. When we look at this, there's still detail in those shadows. And we could do the same. We could lift the highlights even another stop, right? But here I wanted this subtle rhythmic kind of feel on this lake image, and it works. Why? Because we're using shadows. I took this image with the mindset of I'm hunting shadows, not light. We need zone 0 and zone 1 when we edit. We need near clipped black. Because as soon as I take it away, the image becomes watery, mushed out. It looks like some kind of a over-processed, junky HDR. And you know how I feel about those. There's one theme we see here, and that is that zone 0 and zone 1 are incredibly powerful. You should be using them a lot. Even if you're shooting in camera, you can use this, because what does that represent? Well, I showed you in the guide at the beginning, zone 0 and zone 1 is that lower 20 or so % of your histogram on the left side. Left is black, right is white on your histogram. So your histogram more or less is showing you zones. Your stops are giving you zones. Your editing here, you can control zones, whether it's just with a little zone guide. And by the way, I'm going to include a mobile zone guide and more of a desktop Photoshop type zone guide over on the blog post. I'll link it in the comments below. And of course, if you want to check out Lumist or Blackroom, you can play with the real-time map. It's much easier for me to show you zones and illustrate this with the real-time map, because you're seeing everything that's happening in the image all at once and to exact specifications. And what this illustrates is just how much power you have when you change that light. A stop can make a lot of difference. The light in this room since I started recording has dropped a stop, and I look completely different. The shadows behind me are completely different. Don't underestimate the stop. Don't underestimate your shadows, and especially don't underestimate zone 0 and zone 1. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We will talk more about the other zones if you want, but I wanted to take on this little zone editing primer. I'll put a link to another video that's kind of an introduction to exposing in camera and thinking about zones when you're actually setting up your exposure as well. I'll put that in the links below in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.